Hello, and welcome to the live broadcast from Kyiv of the European Resilience Initiative Center. And I'm Sergej Sumelnny, and thank you for having enjoyed this broadcast today. It's amazing to have you here, and I hope that you can hear me well. At least if there are no commentaries in the chat that there is no sound, that I hope that the sound is there. So first, greetings from Kiev. I've spent several days here, almost a week, mostly delivering drones to the 47th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Army. The drones which have been donated by the mostly Twitter community. And we have raised within the last months about 140,000 euro, which was absolutely amazing. And this week we could deliver the last batch of the drones to the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which is currently fighting at Avdiivka, like the brigade used to fight on Zaporizhia direction in the south of Ukraine until recently. Then they have been returned to Ukraine's distant regions where they have been reinforced and got new training. And now they're fighting at Avdiivka. And thank you everyone who has donated so we could purchase drones and deliver them. And now we're raising a new campaign for the next batch of drones for them. But that is like the prehistory, and I'm pretty sure that you would like to know how it feels in Kiev and what is the situation here and what people are talking about and what are their expectations and how do people in Ukraine see the West and especially the Western position on arms deliveries. And because there are a lot of talks here in Ukraine, what is the position of the West? Does the West betray us? What does the West want? Do they want us to win, or do they want us to continue to fight without any visible outcome, etc.? And I think we can talk about all these things tonight. And you can write your questions in the chat. I hope the chat function is open, at least I have opened it. And please forgive me if I'm doing something wrong. It's not my first live broadcast, but I don't do them regularly. So it can be that I do something not in the perfect or optimal way. First, we have seen during the last days the largest attack of Russian Iran designed Shahed drones in the night from Friday on Saturday. Russia has launched 75 Shahed drones against Ukraine. 71 of these drones have been shut down. And I need to tell you, it is it's not best feeling to being waken up in the night by the sound of air raid siren. And they are really they really produce very unpleasant sound here. And then in half an hour, you see the first explosions. And those who live in the north or in the on the east suburbs of Kyiv, also in the west suburbs of Kyiv, where the Russian drones come to Kyiv, they also see a lot of explosions, a lot of artillery fire in the air. I cannot sleep. Those who live in center, they get much less of that cannonade, but still you can hear a lot of explosions in the air. And it is especially bad for kids, of course, for animals like those who have dogs. They say that dogs really they get really crazy. They cannot sleep. Even my good friend has a rabbit, and her rabbit got absolutely crazy during these air raids. And of course, it is not that sort of tragedy one thinks about. First of all, it's not murder, it's not torture, it's not anything like that. But just imagine when the whole city with a population of 3 million people, and Kyiv had before the war about 3.5 million people. Now it's a bit less, maybe 2 million people. But all these millions of people get disturbed and need to go to shelter. And some, they see how the debris fall down from the air. And we know that, yes, it is pretty safe to be in Kyiv because of the air defense, but still, during the last attack, one drone destroyed a kindergarten children's center. And that is the real outcome of the war. And that is actually what Russia wants to achieve. The main attack, of course, the main goal of the attack is to destroy Ukrainian energy infrastructure, or terrorize Ukrainian civilians in sort of killing them or destroying houses. But the parallel effect, the millions of hours of sleep deprivation which Ukrainians suffer every night of these attacks, and fear, and psychological problems, and that people cannot concentrate on work next day, and children who are crying, and the parents who need to calm them down, that is calculated in this attack. And that is what many politicians in the West just do not understand, as they say that, okay, we deliver our air defense systems, and air defense is really very good over Kyiv. If you are really cynical and if you believe in mathematics, you can sleep through the night because you know that the chances to get hit are very low. But not everyone can do it. And you can install as much as you want air defense over Ukraine, but you cannot cover Ukraine completely. It is the largest European country, 2.5 times larger than Germany, 1,500 kilometers from east to west, 1,000 kilometers from north to south. And we're talking only about Kyiv, which is pretty safe, but you have Odessa, you have Kharkiv, you have Kherson, cities where explosions happen every night and sometimes every day. So that is what the Western politicians really do not understand, or cannot understand, or don't want to understand, because you cannot win the war only providing air defense or other sorts of defense, because you always give the aggressor a chance to make the attacks more sophisticated, to choose new tactics, to select new combination of drones, cruise missiles, ground-launched ballistic missiles, Kinjal air-launched ballistic missiles. You can start the ways. Or what the Russians do, they just let their MiG-31 carrier of air-launched ballistic missiles, Kinjal, just start in Belarus. And the Ukrainians see that with their radars, that the MiG-31 has started in the airport, from the airport in Belarus. And that airplane can carry Kinjal missile, which is maybe the most dangerous Russian missile. And the air raid alarm sounds in the whole Ukraine, in whole Ukraine. And that is what the Russians do. They try to terrorize the Ukrainians. So when Scholz or Pistorius or others say we deliver IRIS-T, we deliver Patriot, we deliver other NASAMs and other air defense missiles, that is good, of course, because a lot of Ukrainian lives are being saved by that. But this doesn't bring this war to victory or to end, because Russians can concentrate their attacks. They can produce more missiles. We know that the Russians now, that will be, I think, the next part of our conversation. The Russians have now about 40% of their budget invested exclusively in military and security spendings. I think they have 30% of budget invested exclusively in military, another 15% in police and other law enforcement and actually terror authorities. And they can produce as much missiles as they can and just stockpile them and wait for a good opportunity to launch them against the Ukrainian infrastructure, against power plants, against power grid, or against living areas in the towns. And as long as we in the West invest exclusively in Ukrainian air defense capacities, we actually let the Russians to continue to play this game and to raise these stakes and continue to kill Ukrainians on the occupied territories, because the Ukrainians cannot push the Russians back, as long as they cannot cut through the Russian defense lines. Like, if you have any questions or if you have any comments on you think that I'm talking bullshit, which maybe I do, please write a comment in this video, and I will try to answer your questions if you have them, or you will be able like to bring your idea to expression, etc. So I think it is important to talk also about the recent speech of Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin, yesterday, he visited like some sort of a quasi NGO and civil society run council, or like some meeting, some session of like Russian communities. And it was a weird view, because like on the scene they had the icons with Christ the Savior on the left and on the right, and in the middle they had Vladimir Putin. So it was the Holy Trinity of like God Son, and God Vladimir Putin in the middle. And that was like absolutely weird from my perspective. But much more weird, it was what Putin said. And Vladimir Putin has actually described his view of an ideal Russian world, as he names it, Ruski Mir. And we know that Russian world, Ruski Mir, is a concept of Russian cultural dominance and of the Russian alleged right to control neighboring nations. And what Putin said, he said first that the Russian people consist of three parts of Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians. He doesn't use the word Belarusian, he says Belarusians, of course. And that actually means that in this concept, and it's a pretty old concept, like it's a concept which is at least 200 years old, there are no such nations as Belarusians or Ukrainians. They are just sort of varieties of the great Russian nation. So it is a total denial of cultural, historical, linguistic, political, or other independency of these nations. And that is why like this genocidal concept of Russia is sometimes looks weird for many in the West, because like people in the West say, okay, like when the Russians say the Ukrainians are Russians, how can it be racist? Well, it is pretty racist, because the moment when you get into like the hands of the Russians and you start to speak Ukrainian, and nowadays like you can be beaten, tortured, and executed out of their idea that Ukrainianism should be erased. But their goal is either to kill you or to twist you that much and brainwash you that much that you proclaim yourself Russian and start serving the great Russian Empire. So it is racist in the meaning that they really target you and torture or kill you as long as you identify yourself as Ukrainian, or as long as they identify you as Ukrainian. But in this imperialistic approach to neighboring nations, and in the approach to use the colonized nations as a source for human resource, they are like ready to accept you as a loyal slave and loyal slave of the Russian Empire. And from that perspective, like they can use you. And that was actually what the Russians tried to do all the way. Not only during the last 10 years, during the last like decades and hundreds of years, they tried to erase the Ukrainian identity, or at least degrade it to some sort of polishing of like some Russian spirit, and say, okay, like you can sing a Ukrainian song once a year, but don't do anything besides that. Yes, and Vladimir Putin, he proclaimed that the Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians are one nation, but he added a very interesting idea. He said that actually the Russian world, Ruski Mir, also includes all the parts of the former Soviet Union and the Russian Empire. He literally said that Russia is not only Russian Federation, or like these newly occupied, as he said, acquired regions of Ukraine. He said that Russia is the former Soviet Union and the former Russian Empire. Hello, the United States. You remember Alaska? Alaska was once a part of the Russian Empire. And according to this speech of Vladimir Putin, this part of the United States, this federal state of Alaska, is also a part of Russia. But that was not everything. He did not only proclaimed the former republics of the Soviet Union, like Kazakhstan, Georgia, Azerbaijan, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus, I don't know, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and everything as Russia. He also said that Russia is also is being situated also there where Russian minority is living, where Russian minority lives on the territory of Europe and other nations. And that is actually the continuation and the development of Vladimir Putin's former concept that Russia is there where Russian language is being spoken. And that is a very interesting concept, that first he proclaims every person who speaks Russian as a Russian, and that's how the colonized nations who were forced to speak Russian, they are, in this logic, they are being proclaimed Russians, so their identity is being destroyed by the fact that they speak Russian. So from that twisted logic, you can say to any Kazakh or any Georgian, like, you're not a Georgian, you're not a Kazakh because you speak Russian. And as you speak Russian, you're Russian. And from that moment, like, Russia has alleged right to control you and to claim your land. But in another step, he says that every part of the world where people live who speak Russian is a part of Russia. And that is, from my perspective, the most aggressive and the most expansionist concept which Vladimir Putin has ever made public in this concentrated form. And this is actually a very interesting thing. Well, I now, like I told you that it's not my first, but not my 10th chart. So I'm something like in the third or fourth live broadcasting, and that's why I couldn't open the chart. And now I have done it, and I see that there are like some messages. And yes, I can clearly read them. The sound is okay. Yulia Romanets sends a Ukrainian flag. Thank you, Yulia. And Jonathan says, thank you for the stream, Sergej. How do you think we can make our politicians better understand the urgent need for more ammunition, air defense, 155 millimeter artillery shells and mortars? Okay, Jonathan. If I could tell you, if I had, first of all, thank you for your question. It's great, and it's indeed a very important thing. But if I knew how to push our politicians, our German politicians, like your British or Irish or American politicians, into sending more ammunition to Ukraine, I would have done it. I have no idea. What I can do now is try to like analyze and to bring this complex problem into bricks, like to deconstruct it and try to address like every part of the problem separately. So does Ukraine need a lot of ammunition? Yes, it does. What we see on the front line, we see that during the last weeks, Ukraine starts again to use much less ammunition than before. There was a short time, I think in August this year, as Ukraine, for the first time in this war, used more shells per day than the Russians used, because Ukraine could efficiently destroy with Storm Shadows and with other missiles, also before with HIMARS, but later, especially with Storm Shadows and Scalp missiles, Ukraine could effectively destroy Russian ammunition storages. and Russians could not cover this gap, and Russians needed desperately more ammunition. That's why Vladimir Putin went to North Korea and asked the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un to send North Korean ammunition to Russia. North Korean ammunition was of bad quality, and not everyone was sure that the shells are safe to be operated. We have seen videos how the Russians use missiles from North Korea in the multiply launch rocket systems, and they operated them from safer distance because they have never been sure if this missile fires from the multiply launch rocket system, or if this missile explodes in the launch platform. But anyway, the Russians could finally cover the gap, and the Ukrainians were slowly out of the ammunition. And the problem was that the cruise missiles, Scalp and Storm Shadow, they were not also replaced in the volume which Ukraine needed them. So as Ukraine wants to have some safe deposit of the cruise missiles, they do not launch as much of them as they could because they want to have some of them spared for the really bad day. But neither the UK nor France can send these cruise missiles in that volume as they have been sent before. And the US is very reluctant in saying like long-range missiles. It was a huge discussion about ATACMS missiles, and there is no discussion about Tomahawks, and now there is a stop on delivery of ammunition because of the Congress. And Germany, like my country, unfortunately says we don't send Taurus missiles because of fear of confrontation, etc. And yes, and we cannot send as much as Ukraine needs, 155 millimeter shells, because we don't produce them that much. And so, yes, Ukrainians need both missiles and artillery shells a lot, and they don't have them. How can the Ukrainians cover this gap? Okay, so the Ukrainians extensively use FPV drones, first-person view drones, the kamikaze drones. They are very cheap. They cost 3 up to 500 euro per piece, and can carry a hand grenade or an RPG charge, like anti-tank charge. And they have been used in combination with civilian drones, which are much more expensive and more sophisticated. So with much better optics. So civilian drones like guards, they shows the whole situation, and the FPV drone operator gets information where he or she should send the drone, and then he or she sees with the goggles the target, and the target gets hit. And that sounds perfect. And we have seen all these hunting of the Russian soldiers and Russian equipment, Russian cars and trucks and tanks, and I don't know, like air defense systems with these drones. But this is being used only because the Ukrainians don't have enough of artillery shells. That is the problem. Because if the Ukrainian army would have had enough of artillery shells and enough of jets and enough of cruise missiles, no one would ever needed to have hundreds of soldiers hunting like small groups of Russian soldiers with FPV drones, with this Vox 17 grenades, 40 millimeter grenades, or with other things, because it wouldn't have been needed. This only covers the gap. I think we have now, like the YouTube says me, we have advertising. I'm not sure, if you can continue to see me, or should I make a pause for the advertising, because YouTube told me that we have some advertising gap. Okay, but I hope I will just continue, because I don't see any reactions in the chart. Okay, so now what do we have? We have the deficit of artillery shells, we have deficit of missiles, and we have as a result, we have the stuck on the front line, or at least we don't have as much as success as Ukraine demonstrated in the last year. So what can be done to force our politicians to do the job right? First, I think we need to address the fears of the politicians. Why do they act like that? And when I ask myself, why does Scholz act like Scholz? Why is it so? The argumentation of Scholz effectively has never changed since the outcome, since the start of the full-scale invasion. If we remember, the Scholz made a lot of loud statements. Like Scholz talked about Zeitenwende, the epochal change, and did nothing or very less things. And at the same time, he explained to the German audience why he doesn't send to Ukraine the heavy equipment like artillery or tanks or IFVs, infantry fighting units, because he's afraid of the confrontation. Remember, in April last year, we had a cover on the Spiegel magazine, and Scholz explained in this interview in the Spiegel magazine, the biggest magazine in Germany, that if Germany sends tanks and IFVs to Ukraine, then Russia will use weapons on Germany, and maybe it will end in a nuclear war. And no one wants to be hit by Russian nuclear missile. That's why the chancellor, as a person who sweared on like the constitution to protect the German nation with all means he can, and to to repel any harm from the German nation, he is obliged not to send heavy weapons to Ukraine, because that would make Vladimir Putin angry, and that will make Vladimir Putin to attack Germany. So that sounds plausible for some, not plausible for me at all, because I know that Vladimir Putin always attacks not those who resist, but those who seem to be weak or reluctant or undecisive. And Chancellor Scholz demonstrated that he's weak, reluctant, and undecisive, and that made him for a perfect target for Vladimir Putin, and not the fact if Germany sends weapons or not. But from this perspective, and I come back to the question of Jonathan, how can we make our politician act? We remember that the only tool which worked perfectly on Scholz was pressure from outside. It was pressure from Poland, it was pressure from France, it was pressure from the United Kingdom, from the US, from Ukraine, from Ambassador Andriy Melnik of Ukraine, and even from his own coalition, as, for example, the Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck openly said that he urges Poles to send to Ukraine Leopard 2 tanks without waiting for an approval from Germany, because Germany will accept it after all as a fact. And the Poles just send the tanks because the tanks are needed. And now we have seen, and maybe we'll come later to this question, we have seen that there is at least an idea or a suspicion that there is some sort of a collusion between Chancellor Scholz and President Biden, who both are afraid of Russia being defeated, which could, in their minds, trigger some sort of political avalanche and lead to some consequences which cannot be analyzed from nowadays, and which can be devastating, like civil war in Russia, nuclear weapons come to wrong hands, I don't know, China grabs a part of Russia. I don't know what they are afraid about, but they are afraid of that, and they believe that it is cheaper and more secure to freeze the war as it is and let Russia effectively control some part of Ukraine and support Ukraine with defensive weapons like air defense, anti-tank mines, etc., and maybe even give Ukraine money to rebuild the economy, in a hope that someone this will lead to economic prosperity of Ukraine, and maybe the occupied parts of Ukraine will come back. And that is what I personally hear many times from social democratic politicians in Germany when they say, like, look, Germany was divided after World War II. It took like 45 years or 40 years for us to reunite. Nothing bad. It's like it was bad, okay, but it wasn't a tragedy. And after all, we are one nation and we're stronger than before. And it is better than war. And I always tell to these guys, like they're mostly guys, like sometimes girls, but mostly guys from the Social Democratic Party. I always tell them, look, first, you seem to forget why Germany was divided, because like there were like some tiny little things maybe you don't remember as a German politician, but I am as a naturalized German from the Soviet Union, born in Soviet Union. I remember that there was like something called World War II and the Holocaust, and maybe you don't remember it, but it was the reason why Germany was occupied and divided, and that is why Germany was like put under occupation and pressure, and the state was reformed, and new politicians have been installed, and that was the reason. But that's not all. Okay, that of course that explains that we have no moral or other rights to implement the same solution on Ukraine, because Ukraine hasn't attacked anyone, and Ukraine hasn't started World War, and Ukraine didn't like organize Holocaust or something similar to that. But you don't like you don't analyze the wishes of Russia now. And after World War II, even the Soviet Union didn't have a genocidal plans against Eastern Germans. They were occupied but not exterminated. And in Ukraine, we see an extermination of Ukrainians. And we know that the Western Germany, Federal Republic of Germany, was immediately accepted into NATO, like almost immediately, like in 1955. Like the division took place like in 1949 with proclamation of GDR and FRG, and in 1955 FRG was member of NATO, and the troops, like the Allied troops, stood all the time from 45. They stood in Western Germany, and if the Russians would have tried to take over parts of Western Germany, even West Berlin in 1947. When the Russians tried to blockade West Berlin, the Allied forces used all their military power, air power, to supply West Berlin, and the Allied divisions stood in West Berlin and were ready to die and to kill the Russians because they wanted to protect West Berlin. Do you want now to protect this line, if you want to freeze this conflict or this war, like as it was frozen the division of Germany back then? Do you want to send several NATO divisions and install them in Kherson, in Zaporizhia, in Avdiivka, in Kharkiv? Do you want to send American troops? Do you want to send nuclear weapon to Ukraine, because there are nuclear weapons in Germany, which are American nuclear weapons, but they are in hands of the German commanders? Do you want to give Ukrainians American nukes? And do you want to have American army with foot on the ground and with an order to kill the Russians when one single Russian soldier crosses the Dnipro River? And I think the answer is no. And as long as the answer is no, don't talk to me that bullshit about the German solution for Ukraine, about this division for 40 years, because this division doesn't work as long as you don't have nukes in the country, and as long as you don't have NATO divisions in the country. Okay, and then we need to address Scholz openly, constantly debunking his lies, because he is lying. His argumentation is purely bullshit, and it is a purely lie, because what he says has been debunked all the time as false statements. There is nothing like that. What Putin does, what Scholz believed Putin does. Scholz promised us peace with Putin 2 weeks before the war started, as Scholz returned from Moscow after his so-called peace mission. And everything Scholz did, he did too late or too few, and he was always being dragged to the right solution. And he needs to be dragged to the right solution or kicked out from the chancellery, which I hope this government will be able to do, but I don't believe they will be able to do it. I hope, Jonathan, I have answered your question. I don't want to stay much more on the personality of slippery Scholz. And yes, you can see I don't like him. Alex Kacharev asks, Russia has resumed its attack UAV strikes on Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine recently. Is it having an impact on public sentiment in Ukraine? Um, yeah, and first, Alex, thank you for your question. I tried to address like a bit of this recent largest UAV strike on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities in the very beginning of this live broadcast. As some of them who are watching it maybe have not seen it, I can briefly repeat it. So it was on this Friday, Saturday, on the anniversary of Holodomor Remembrance Day, this Russian genocide on Ukrainians by starvation in 1932-33. The Russians love to attack Ukraine on such dates, on birthday of a national poet Shevchenko, or Holodomor Day, or Independence Day, or on Christmas Eve. Like, they love to bomb Ukraine on Christmas. And they have attacked Ukraine now on Holodomor Remembrance Day. And that was unpleasant, but it was not that, I would say, the material impact was not that big, because most of these drones have been shot down. But the moral impact was bad, because not because people are afraid, people are used to it, but people cannot sleep once again through the night. And children are crying, dogs are barking, you cannot concentrate next day, you don't know what happens next day. You think, okay, like now the Russians send like 75 drones, 71 has been shot down, but what if they send like 100 drones or 150 drones? Next day, we don't know how many drones the Russians have. And there are a lot of Telegram channels, anonymous Telegram channels. And that is actually a problem, because like 40% of Ukrainians get their information exclusively from Telegram channels, which are anonymous, and you don't know who stays behind them. And 70% of Ukrainians read them regularly. And in these Telegram channels, and Telegram is a social network which had been a messenger. It's not social network. It's a messenger, but you can run like 1,000 subscribers channels on Telegram. They spread a lot of information about like the attacks, and they sometimes they are sensational, sometimes they're true, sometimes some messages are true and some are sensational. So the atmosphere of fear is, of course, here. And if you go through Kyiv, and I'm now in Kyiv, and the streets in Kyiv are being lighted, and the cafes open, and people are going to shops, they buy their presents, they go to bars, they drink beer, they drink wine. You can order a taxi, a Bolt, or Uber. You can buy flowers, you can order your pizza delivery or something like that. And like post functions perfectly. Like I sent from Kyiv night vision, thermal vision drones to Avdiivka, and they arrived within 30 hours just with the delivery. So the country is operating, and people try to live their normal life. It is like almost 2 years of the war. You cannot constantly be in a war mood. You need to go to theater, you need to go to the cinema, you need to take your round with your friends in a bar, etc. But of course, everyone knows how it was last year. And last year, the Ukrainian energy grid was almost completely being destroyed by the Russians. Ukrainian energy grid has turned into a group of islands, totally isolated, one from each other. You had blackout in many towns and cities, including Kyiv, where nothing worked. And a real blackout is not when your apartment doesn't have electricity for 1 hour or 2 hours. It is when the whole city or the whole district doesn't have electricity. And that includes no electricity on communication antennas of the mobile network. That means your mobile phone, even if it is charged, it doesn't work because the signal doesn't come through. You cannot tank your car because the tank station, the gasoline station, doesn't have power to operate pumps. Elevators do not work nowhere. Subway doesn't work because it needs electricity. Hospitals stop operating because they have a generator which runs with diesel, but this generator has diesel storage for, let me say, 5 hours or 4 hours of work, and after that it stops, and they cannot bring more diesel because, once again, gasoline stations do not have working pumps, and they can't even like bring some tank with diesel to fuel this generator. That is what a real blackout means. That is, in the winter, a genocidal thing. And many Ukrainian houses, especially in province, they have gas heating, and for gas heating you need that your gas heating device gets electricity, because it needs to produce a spark, an electric spark every 5 minutes to ignite the stream of gas, and then it creates like the fire, and it burns like for 2 minutes, then the temperature is achieved, then the fire goes out, and in 10 minutes it needs to be ignited again, and you don't need electricity to do it. So you have gas in your house, but you cannot use it because you don't have electricity to light it up. So of course this memory is fresh, and people are afraid of it. I would not say that people are paranoid or panicking, but they are afraid, of course, because they know what went on last year. What gives many Ukrainians a hope that it will not be that bad is that the Ukrainian drones production is pretty efficient now, and the Ukrainians think that they can, if Russians try to hit Ukraine again with these drones, that the Ukrainians may try to do the same as Russia, retaliate. I'm not that sure if Vladimir Putin is so much vulnerable regarding the suffering of his population. That's why I don't believe that it would be an effective solution. But if the Ukrainians would be able to hit, for example, large Russian power systems and fuel storages, etc., it could make, of course, some impact on the war. Yes, and that's it. That is what is going on. I hope, Alex, I have answered your question. Kale 2011 DE says every argument of Scholz is bullshit. Yes, I agree. That's unfortunately the case. The person seems not to understand Vladimir Putin and not to understand what Vladimir Putin is, what is Putin's way of dealing with his opponents. And for Vladimir Putin, there are no partners, there are only enemies or slaves. You cannot be a friend of Vladimir Putin, you cannot be his partner, because a partner has his or her sovereignty. And for Vladimir Putin, everyone who has sovereignty is an enemy, because he's not fully under his control. So Vladimir Putin can either, and that is the Russian way of thinking. That's why they cannot foster alliances which are built on equality. Even if you look at the Russian CSTO treatment, Collective Security Treaty Organization, it is not a collective security organization. It is Russian military dominance organization. And while like the US in NATO tries to force the allies to invest their money into military and defense budgets, and say like, why do you Germans don't invest your promised 2%? Like, you need to have it. The Russians are happy when the allies do not invest their money, because that means that Russia has a total dominance and can control the military and defense situation in the neighbor countries. And it's not about like protecting them; it's about controlling them, and that is quite different approach, I believe. If you have like any questions or any comments or any ideas which we need to discuss, please leave your comment in the chat, and I will try to address like another topic which is, from my perspective, very important, is how Russia tries to normalize the situation and try to, let me say, to how to express it in a polite way, to penetrate our international organizations and uh, our world. We know that Russia tries since months to address the West and say, look, we need to talk, like we have a solution for you. And we need to, and that is also resonates with the Scholz and Biden's idea of freezing this conflict because war is bad and we are not ready. As we know, the promised European production of artillery shells has never reached the promised plant level. We cannot go, neither France nor Germany cannot reach the level which we promised and which we believe is necessary for our own security. So in this perspective, the temptation to freeze the conflict and to say, okay, like we just like postpone the solution of this problem for the next 10 years, and maybe in 10 years Putin will die and someone better will come to power, maybe Alexei Navalny, maybe Dmitry Medvedev in not the drunken condition, or maybe Mishustin, or maybe someone like him, and we can deal with that and everything will be better, or at least like Olaf Scholz will be a pensioner, retired, and it will not be my problem. So the Russians tried to push it and say, look, we will not go further. We will like stop. And we need to talk. And let's organize like some sort of solution, some sort of discussion platform, and we can go further step by step. And that resonates very much in the mindset of the German politicians who always believe that everyone just wants to talk. And you can find a solution for every conflict if you talk long enough. And that was exactly why Olaf Scholz went to Moscow before the invasion instead of sending tanks to Ukraine. Because in the real world, the only peace solution for Ukraine, the only way to prevent the invasion was to make Ukraine stronger, because that would like scare Russians off. But in the Scholz way of thinking, the only way to prevent every conflict is to talk and propose some smart solution. So that is what the Europeans want to do now. And the problem is that the Russians understand it. They want to use our international platforms. And they want to use the platforms, international platforms like OSCE, as backdoors to infiltrate us. The Russians already control a lot of international institutions. Like the IAEA is totally infiltrated by the Russians. International Atomic Agency, International Atomic Energy Agency. We know what much Russian influence is there. We just know it because like when the and I see now that in 36 minutes YouTube says some of users will see advertising. I hope like I will just like during this advertising I will try to talk not onto the most important things, and I hope you will return after that. I have no influence on that. Well, and the Russians, like when they occupied the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and put mines in it, explosive devices. The IAEA needed weeks and even months to address this problem, and they have never said Rosatom, look, guys, like you operate a nuclear power plant which your army, your state agency, your army has hijacked this power plant, use it as a dirty bomb, potential dirty bomb, and you are operating it, you're enabling it. So guys, we don't need you in an international atomic energy agency. Go away. That has never been done. Never never even tried to address the situation like that. They always try to find some nice peaceful solution with an aggressor and ally. And now we see that the Russians tried now to get a full delegation with Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs, with Maria Zakharova, the Speaker of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with other people, including doctors and medics and drivers, etc. 40% plus of the Russian Foreign Ministry applied for visa to enter Europe and to participate in some session of the OSCE. Organization on Security Cooperation in Europe. And this is the moment which I need to ask myself, what do our politicians expect from Sergei Lavrov to add as a value to this meeting? Like, if you break the isolation of Russia, because all these guys, they will need to fly with a plane and they will make a show out of that. They will make it a show and say, look, Europe is so weak. We wanted to come there. They couldn't stop us. We just fly in and they need to accept us. And we shit on what they banned us and didn't want to see us. It will be their triumph. They will fully, totally use it for their PR reasons. But why do we allow it? Why do we need Sergei Lavrov and his drivers and medics and servants to come to Europe, in this case to North Macedonia, and to participate on our international conference? If you want to talk to Lavrov, if you really want to talk to Lavrov because you think he will say something new, just like invite him via Zoom. And from my perspective, it is not even necessary to invite Lavrov via Zoom because he will only tell lie. Like, have you never heard Lavrov lying? Actually, you need to take every of Lavrov's statements from the last 2 years when he denied that Russia takes Ukraine, that Russia will ever take Ukraine, that Russia violates international law, that Russia violates international treaties. He even denied in some April or May 22 that the Russian troops are in Ukraine. Like, it was like absolutely unbelievable when the foreign minister denied the fact of war. And now we need this guy to talk to our foreign ministers on OSCE conference for what? Like, you want to hear him lying? Just make a random digest of his previous speeches and just let an artificial intelligence to voice it up. There will be no difference with that. So that is a problem. We like the West, the NATO countries, except of the Baltic countries, Poland, Czechia, is not ready to accept the very fact that this war is not only Russian-Ukrainian war. This is a war which Russia runs, Russia leads against the West, against every single country of us. And they don't have any plans to stop it. We have seen statements of the top Russian politicians like this week when they said that they are not afraid of war against NATO and that they are planning to attack NATO. And on this moment, like, many people in Europe would say, okay, like, that's bullshit, because we have seen Russians were not able to take Kyiv, they're not able to take Ukraine. How can they think they can take NATO? It's not possible, just hot air. And from this perspective, of course, that sounds like we may ignore Russian threat because they are too small to threaten us, to threaten NATO. But that is not what Russia, from my perspective, wants to achieve. Russia doesn't think that they can like launch their divisions and march until the English Channel or until Portugal, Cabo de Roca. I don't think that are their plans. They would be absolutely fine with demonstrating the weakness of NATO. They would be absolutely fine to attack what they believe is a smaller NATO state. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, maybe Montenegro, and do it on a level which is under the scale of full-scale thermonuclear, I would say, or conventional even war. In this case, just do you think, like, if the Russian troops just try to blockade, let me say, the harbor in a NATO country, and will threat to use nuclear weapons in a case which is this blockade, if NATO will try to break through this blockade? What will the NATO answer be if this is a small harbor without any prominence of a small NATO member? And a blockade of a harbor, according to international law, according to the United Nations law, is an act of aggression. In this case, I believe personally that Chancellor Scholz and President Biden would say, okay, we will not start a global war because of some small harbor, because of some small border incident. And that is exactly the case which Russians want to achieve. They want to demonstrate that the security promises and security guarantees of the West worth nothing. They want to demonstrate that what we promise to our members doesn't mean anything, and that we are weak and everything can be done with that. And in this case, it can start an avalanche reaction in the West because there will be even more mistrust between the members and it will be extremely toxic. So, from this perspective, when the Russians say that they are not afraid of going into conflict with the NATO, it is not about that they really want to see Moscow nuclearized after they have sent missiles against London or Washington. No, it's about that they just play poker with our politicians, and the Russians love to bluff. And they just say, okay, we do that. What is your response? Because we, the Russians, we are not a democracy. We may sell to our citizens whatever we want, and we may increase the level of readiness to war within our society to the levels you will never even dream to achieve, because it's not what you do. Your democracies, you're responsible towards your citizens. Your citizens go to streets, your citizens protest, you have political parties, you have open discussion, you have political debate. In Ukraine, we have a position here in Ukraine, and in Germany we have a position. In Ukraine during the war, the political parties discuss what to do. Like there are open media, open discussion. Nobody's been arrested, like for criticizing Vladimir Zelensky, etc. And that is not what Russia has. And they know they can threaten us, and then our political groups and our churches and our labor unions and our peace activists will say, oh, please, we don't need a nuclear war. There is nothing worse than nuclear war. The Russians threat us with nuclear war, so we need to communicate with them and offer them something. And that is the key, because as long as we demonstrate to the Russians and signal to the Russians that we are afraid of war, the war will be the Russia's answer. The war will be that what the Russians will threat us with, because they know if they threat us with the war, we accept everything because we say nothing is worse than war. That is a paradox. As much as we are afraid of war, as more we get war, because that is what Russians want. They don't want peace. They want to manipulate us. They want to influence us. And they know that the best way to manipulate us is to start a war, because then we will be ready to do anything just to stop it. And I don't see any questions. I have a comment. I think it's a comment by Jonathan, who says, personally, the OSCE inviting Lavrov to Macedonia is whitewashing Russian war crimes against Ukrainians. OSCE without Russia is largely irrelevant. Well, yes, I think that, okay, the question is, what is the role of the OSCE now? Because like OSCE was an organization developed and introduced after the Helsinki or the Helsinki like agreements. And we know that there are like several baskets of the Helsinki agreements, and we know that Russia doesn't respect any of them. Like the borders of the states, which should be respected, no way. Human rights, no way. Like press freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of meetings, religious freedom. Like try to be a Jehovah Witness in Russia. You'll be arrested on sight because this organization is banned in Russia. Like there are cases when people, the Jehovah Witnesses, they gathered in an apartment of a person and just to read Bible or whatever, like just to pray, and they were arrested for that, for private gathering, for praying in a private apartment. That is about like freedom of religion in Russia. So Russia just doesn't respect anything from Helsinki. I don't understand why we need OSCE with Russia from this perspective. Like, what did OSCE achieve during the last years in like since 2014 in Ukraine after the first Russian invasion, the second Russian invasion? I don't remember anything what OSCE has achieved back then. Like, really. And yes, they published nice reports, but the same reports could be published like by any institution, including the Ukrainian army. And the OSCE was a legal way for Russian agents to operate in Ukraine. Just remember the case of Kharkiv mission of the OSCE, where Russian state, Russian citizens with military background were operating in Kharkiv on leading managing positions of the OSCE during the Russian invasion in Ukraine. That was like what OSCE did. Like, I don't say that they were doing it because they wanted to undermine Ukraine. I don't say so, but effectively they were not useful. Like, they had like their great salaries and their nice way of living, etc. But what was the reason to have them? I don't think that now in Europe we need anything like OSCE. Also, because OSCE was a child of the conflict between the blocs, but the conflict where neither of the blocs dared to attack each other seriously in Europe, and both blocs were strong. Now we have a quite different situation. We have Russia, which has completely abandoned the Soviet concept of division between the zones, and Russia says, like, we just grab whatever we can. And we have the West, which is so weak that it cannot say Russia pull back. Just remember what I told about the West Berlin crisis. 1947, 2 years after Germans were burning Jews in crematories. 2 years after every single German soldier was a Nazi soldier. And in this case, the Western allies were ready to station their divisions in West Berlin and protect that city, which 2 years ago was a legal target for Allied bombers, to protect this city and to die defending Germans, including all the ex-Nazis, just because they didn't want the Russians to occupy another part of the world. And now, like, do we have anything like that? Do we have any readiness like that to protect Ukraine? No. The German chancellor would gladly accept division of Ukraine, from my perspective, if there would be like some nice quasi-legal, semi-legal, not so legal, but politically sellable solution. That is the problem. Okay, I see Andrei Novak has joined the chat, and Andrei is a leader and founder of European Idealists movement from Germany. And he writes here, OSCE is an expensive token shop. Oh, yes. And thoroughly infiltrated by Russia. Oh, yes. But also corrupt influence of Azerbaijan, etc. Oh, yes, of course. And that is also what we saw in Kharkiv with the OSCE mission, when a round of this high-ranked Russian officer in the Kharkiv office of the OSCE, there were also a lot of people from the countries which were traditionally friendly to Russia. So Russia doesn't only bring their officers to the positions, but they also try to create some sort of a group which is camouflaged as international group, but effectively there are countries which either are non-democratic at all or half democratic, semi-democratic, but under control or influence of Russia. Like, just imagine like a mission of Russian, Belarusian, Hungarian, and I don't know, like from the later time Slovakian officers in OSCE somewhere in Ukraine. Like that would be something which I would not call a very good solution. Okay, so we have spoken over 1 hour now about all the topics in Ukraine and around, and we have spoken about like Russia and the West. What I wanted also to address, and I really urge you to read this report. That is a report. Yeah, Andre writes now, diplomacy alone cannot achieve much. Like diplomacy is always worth as much as you can enforce the agreement. Like every businessman, every business person knows that if you sign a contract and another party doesn't fulfill it, you can go to court and you can enforce your legal claims. In international law, there are like some of such things like international arbitrage, etc. But effectively, if one country repeatedly says no, there are no that much ways to do anything. There are sanctions and there are military solutions. And if one country gets attacked by another one, there can be, in most cases, only a military solution as long as sanctions don't work. And in the case of Russia, we cannot use sanctions against Russia that much as we could with the United Nations, because the United Nations sanctions, which are obligatory for every member of the UN, cannot be applied on Russia as long as Russia, from my perspective, illegally has a seat in the UN Security Council. We can talk on that too, if you'd like. And the military response to Russia doesn't take place that much as long as our politicians, Olaf Scholz, Joe Biden, are so much want to go their way of controlled escalation or escalation management, which has proven to be wrong. Because what Biden and Scholz did all the time, they didn't want to supply Ukraine with all the weapons so the Ukrainians could continue with their effective offensive of summer 22 and not only liberate parts of Kharkiv region or Sumy region or Chernihiv and Kyiv region, but also go south and liberate Zaporizhia and Kherson. And the Ukrainians said, give us tanks, give us IFVs, give us jets, we will kick the Russians out and the war will be over until December. And that could be very realistic. What Biden and Scholz did, they said, oh no, if the Russian front will collapse, we don't know what will happen in Russia. We don't know what will happen in Moscow. Will Putin be assassinated? Will Russia go nuclear? Will be like a civil war in Russia, or will be something terrible? So let us control the escalation. Let us make escalation management. Let's do it step by step. Let's like boil the Russian frog on a very slow fire. What did it mean? Effectively, the Russians could create the whole defensive line from Kherson to Donetsk, installing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of landmines, digging trenches, building bunkers, like creating the maps of artillery fire, which stopped the Ukrainian offensive because the Russians knew very precisely where to shoot, what weapons to shoot, what to use. Mobilize another 300,000 soldiers. They are of shitty quality, but they are 300,000 shitty quality soldiers, and that is something. So the whole defensive line, which can be called easily Scholz-Biden line, is now stopping the Ukrainian offensive. And then we gave the Ukrainians like 20 Leopard 2 tanks, perfect deal, like 30 Abrams tanks, perfect deal for 1,000 kilometers of front line, like 50 West-produced heavy tanks. Nothing. And then the Ukrainians in July 23, they sent like in 47th Brigade, they sent a battalion with like Leopards and Bradleys. And of course, despite all the attempts to clean all the landmines, like one tank hit the mine, another tank tried to pass it, hit another mine, got caught by artillery. The Ukrainians lost 5 Leopard 2 tanks, 10 or 15 Bradleys. Russians filmed it with drones and sent it to media. And what our media said, oh, the Ukrainians are so stupid, they cannot operate the tanks we gave them, what should be done? Like, there is no sense of supporting Ukraine, etc., all the bullshit. They totally ignored that the Ukrainians tried to storm the most defended defense line in the history of the later decades, without any jets, without enough artillery, and they haven't lost like mostly people. They lost like some equipment. Equipment can be replaceable, but the Ukrainians, like, they destroy like 10 to 50 Russian battle tanks a day. Nobody reports about it, but 5 Leopard tanks. Wow, a catastrophe. So what do we observe at the end? At the end, we see that Biden and Scholz, they were so afraid of something which they could not even imagine, that they led the Russians to push the situation into some sort of very unfavorable for us condition. And now Russians totally use it and say, look, we're stuck, like you're stuck. Let's deal, let's get some deal. And that is really, really problematic. Okay, so we have here, Andrei Novak writes, remember, there have been 200 rounds of negotiation, Minsk format. I think that could be something what Scholz could find like even interesting for him now, like having Minsk 3 or something like that. And because it gives jobs, like all the German diplomats in their nice suits, like very gray, very stylish, very Hugo Boss, like could go to Geneva or to, I don't know, to Vienna, and have their endless dinners and endless talks, and then they can spread gossips about how stupid are Ukrainians, how they are emotional, how they don't understand, how they want to have all the pie, but there cannot be anything, like there should be any compromise. You cannot have it all. If you cannot get it, don't be kind, don't be a key, don't be a child, don't be so childish. All these colonial bullshit. Nathalie Isabel Vogel says, can you elaborate on the people advising Scholz? Oh, I'm pretty sure you could do it much more than me. By the way, like I've seen that there is like now advertising. Does anyone hear me, or am I talking to an advertising? Can anyone hear me? Can anyone write in the chat that they that you hear me? Or is it something what you can hear? Otherwise, I will try like maybe to wait for 30 seconds and continue to talk, answering Natalie's question. Does anyone hear me? Because like I see like there are people in this broadcast, but YouTube said me that there is an advertising on YouTube, which YouTube starts now, and I don't know like if it is being ended, or if I should talk. Okay, like, oh yeah, great, thank you Jens for this comment. So now I see that you can see it, and I will try to answer Nathalie's question. So the question is like, who is advising Scholz, and who are these people, and what do they want to achieve? Like, I'm afraid that Olaf Scholz, who is a chancellor of the Social Democratic Party, which has very strong ties to Russia and very emotional and semi-religious view on Russia. And that is, I think it's important, because many Germans who are advertising for more understanding of Russia, these people, they love to criticize Ukrainians and to discredit Ukrainian arguments as emotional, or like not balanced, or like childish, or something like that. And that is actually a way of how like women also get silenced in discussion when like a woman stands up and says like, hey, like I was beaten or I was attacked, or my salary is like 30% less than of my like male colleague. Well, I do like twice as much as he does. And then they say, okay, you are too emotional, you cannot judge your own case, like sit down and shut up because like we know better. That is what Germans try to do with the Ukrainians. They say, or you cannot judge on your own case. You are so nationalistic, so like narrow-minded. The Russians, they have their perspective, and you need to just make some deal with the Russians and like agree on something. And I think that these people are surrounding Olaf Scholz because that is the social democratic way of thinking about Russia. And that is an emotional way. That is an illogical way because they always think that they can sign a deal with Vladimir Putin, while our experience and the science says, statistics, history says that Vladimir Putin never respects any deal. So these people who are totally emotional, who are totally illogical, who are totally ignorant, they teach us like how to deal with Vladimir Putin. And these people advise Olaf Scholz. I also think that the problem around Olaf Scholz is that I would say some parts of the Social Democratic Party are, I would say, they don't try to pursue the real positive goal and real values which we want democratic elected politicians to pursue. And here we can say that the parts of the SPD are just interested and still interested in having deals with the Gazprom or with other Russian gas companies. Like think of the minister president, like prime minister of the northeastern region, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Manuel Schwesig, who was the biggest supporter of Nord Stream 2 in Germany, even after the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and who organized all this infrastructure, political infrastructure for that, who supported the creation of so-called Environment Foundation, which was a vehicle to enable the construction of Nord Stream 2, who organized Russia-Germany business days in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, etc., etc. And here, I think it is a very interesting historical example of how German politicians got influenced by Russia and got impacted and controlled, if you want, by Russia. So think about the year 2009. Year 2009 is when there was the world economic crisis, and many companies in Europe and in the US went bankrupt. And in this time, the region of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, northeast of Germany, Baltic seasides, border to Poland, the entry point of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. They are actually a very poor country, a very poor region in Germany, and they have pretty much neo-Nazis in this Germany, despite the fact they don't have at least no migrants or almost no migrants, but that is the fact. They have very many far right support in the region, and they have several cities where they had big production. One of these cities or towns was the town of Wismar on the seaside. What was the town of Wismar? The town of Wismar had shipyards, Nordic yards. Oh no, back then Vadan yards, and Vadan yards went bankrupt. What did the government of the Mecklenburg-Vorpommern did? They addressed personally Dmitry Medvedev, who was a Russian quasi-president back then, and asked them to find a Russian investor for this Vadan yard. And the Russian investor, with Medvedev's help or without it, was found. And it was Mr. Yusupov, who was a son, about 30-ish years old, a young gentleman, a millionaire, Russian millionaire, a son of a former Gazprom board member and Russian Minister of Energy, Mr. Yusupov. Very talented gentleman who earned his millions. And Mr. Yusupov Jr. bought these Vadan yards and renamed it into Nordic yards. What was done effectively? Effectively, it was done the following. The city of Wismar, which is about 40,000 people and an important city for Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, was saved from a huge surge of unemployment. And the savior was a Russian who invested his money into a company which was bankrupt and most probably not that efficient. And every time when and that guy was connected and said his father was in Gazprom, etc. And every time when this region could raise its voice in support for Gazprom, it was clear that this investment will not disappear. But if this region would have raised a voice against Gazprom, who knows? Maybe this investment would be gone, and then the city will once again face a threat of unemployment and social unrest. Another investment in that city, Wismar, on the border, on the sea side of Baltic Sea in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Germany, was Ilim Timber, which was a company directly linked to Dmitry Medvedev, Russian quasi-president. What a surprise! So two companies in a very poor city with a lot of threat of unemployment were suddenly owned by the Russian owners who were directly related to the top levels of the Russian politics and also Gazprom, because don't forget, Dmitry Medvedev is also not a person who is not unfamiliar with Gazprom. So what did the Russians do further? The Kirovsky Zavod, a Russian company, tried to buy, if I'm not mistaken, in Thuringia, another bankrupt company which was producing buses. And the cherry on the cake was the attempt of Russian Sberbank, the biggest Russian state-owned bank, to buy Opel car manufacturer. Opel was a subsidiary of General Motors, and General Motors has suffered from the world economic crisis, and Opel went bankrupt, and Opel had, I think, about 110,000 workers in Europe, mostly in Germany. And like no country would be happy if 100,000 people would suddenly get unemployed. And then Russian bank comes to Germany and say, guys, we can buy your precious car producing company. We have no experience with producing cars. We have no experience with any manufacturing production, but we are the best investors because we buy it. And I remember how in 2009, German Gref, the CEO of Russian Sberbank, went to Frankfurt International Automobile Exhibition, and he was cheered as the next owner of Opel, and he was sitting in the first row together with the prime minister of the region of Hesse, where the biggest Opel factory in Rüsselsheim, close to Frankfurt, was located. And this deal was undermined in the last moment when GM was bailed out by the US government, and that's why they didn't sell Opel to Russia. But just imagine now, when Russia had owned Opel in Germany and could say any time to German politicians, look, if you apply sanctions against Russia, you know what we do? We know that Opel is not the best car producer in the world. We just go out of it, or we will cut the production, or we'll do other things. And just imagine, you will have unemployment in your country. You will have demonstrations of workers in your country. Maybe you will have a government in some of your regions, maybe in Hesse, or maybe in other regions. In another Opel factory was in, if I'm not mistaken, in Thuringia, in Eisenach. In these regions, you will have problems for your governments, for your politicians. Maybe some far-right party, some AfD party comes to power there because they will say, we will not sanction Russia, we will have friendship with Russia, and the Russians will bring more investment and will not close the factory. That is how Russians inflated it and influenced it and took it under some sort of control, I believe. And I think that all these years and years and decades of talking to Russians and buying their arguments and having conferences with them pays back now when Olaf Scholz says, okay, we need to deal with Russia. Also, don't forget, for years and decades, German foreign ministry was in the hands of the Social Democrats. And we had generations of foreign ministers who were social democrats. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Heiko Maas, Sigmar Gabriel, and you name them. And they were all Russia-centrated. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, during the Russian war against Ukraine, he preferred to go to Russia, not to Ukraine. He visited the Donetsk region, like the front line, only once, like from Ukrainian side, like shortly visited it, and that was it. But he went to Russia in 2016, years after Russia invaded Ukraine, years after Russia started to indiscriminately bomb civilian areas in Syria and enabling Assad to gas Syrians. Minister Steinmeier went to Russian city of Yekaterinburg in southern Urals and held there a speech in the university. And he addressed Minister Lavrov, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who was presenting in the room, not only as Minister Sergej Lavrov, but also Sergej, my friend. And he offered Russia in that speech. And it is still published on the webpage of the German federal president as one of speeches which Steinmeier held in one of his office positions. And he said that Germany and Russia must unite in programs of rebuilding of Syria. He literally offered a rapist a joint program on psychological support for the survivor. Like, he offered Russia, who killed thousands of civilians, to participate on joint projects with Germany to reconstruct Syria. That was Frank-Walter Steinmeier. That was a stone pillar of the cornerstone of the German foreign policy. And this guy is still in his office as federal president, and he is formerly head of German state. And he is a person who, 2 weeks before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, gave his interview to Rheinische Post newspaper on 9th, I believe, February 2022. And he said that Germany may not stop construction of Nord Stream 2 because, he said, Nord Stream 2 is the only bridge which connects Russia and Germany, and Nord Stream 2 is the way to compensate Russia the suffering of Russians during World War II, which Germans have caused. That was the most wrong and toxic argumentation, because it completely ignored interests of two nations, of Ukraine and Poland, who have suffered from German genocidal war much more than Russia. Ukraine and Poland was totally occupied by the Nazi Reich. Ukraine lost about 16% of its population, much more than Russia lost. Ukraine lost, like, every single city was destroyed or damaged. The worst massacre on Jews happened in Kyiv, in Babin Yar. 30,000 Jews executed within 2 days, even before Wannsee Conference. The biggest destruction of one city by German Wehrmacht and SS during a so-called retaliation strike, this terror destruction of the city, took place in Ukraine, in Korykivka, northern part of Chernihiv region. Almost 5,000 people killed within 2 days, civilians, the whole city exterminated by the Germans. So that is all the German responsibility towards Ukraine. And Steinmeier, who actually to that date, to February 22, already visited Korykivka and knew that, and he visited also the Babin Yar and knew that. And this guy was sitting in his office and telling that Germany has responsibility towards Russia. That's why Nord Stream 2 should be built. That means that he ignored Ukrainian argument. That means that he didn't feel any responsibility towards Ukrainian. He didn't feel any responsibility for Babin Yar, for 30,000 killed Jews. He didn't feel any responsibility for 6,000 killed citizens of Korykivka. He didn't feel responsibility of destruction of Ukrainian infrastructure, of burned down fields, etc. He only felt his responsibility to his dear friend Vladimir Putin, who wanted to sell Russian gas to Germany, or to control Germany through this gas. And he didn't feel any responsibility for Poles, for Warsaw Uprising, for Warsaw Ghetto destruction in 1943, Warsaw Uprising in 1944, for concentration camps and death camps on territory of Poland, which German Nazis have built, where they have killed millions of people, millions of people. No single word about these crimes in this interview, where Frank-Walter Steinmeier stressed the importance of Nord Stream 2 Moscow-Berlin connection because of the World War II. And this is the guy who literally, like, until now is one of the voices which forms Germany and which is the head of the state. I repeat it again. I hope, Natalie Vogel, I have answered your question. If you allow me to stop here to elaborate on that question. We have, okay, Jonathan describes an advertising of car insurance, which you had in the beginning. I hope that you have a car insurance or you don't need it. But anyway, interesting what YouTube thinks should be a suitable advertising during a talk about Ukraine. And Andrei Novak writes, indeed, what's not to like? Cheap, risk-free, and comforting for guilty conscience. Yeah, I think you're talking about Russian gas, Andrei, and I appreciate your satiric approach. Yes, of course, what could go wrong with the Russian gas? Absolutely, but this is also one of the very serious arguments from my perspective about the need of quite different approach to Russia compared to what we had to later Soviet Union. Like, I personally think that we had two quite different Soviet Unions. We had the Soviet Union in the 1920s, 1930s, a very aggressive Soviet Union in Europe. Just think about the Soviet-Polish War, Soviet invasion to Poland, as the Soviets were stopped just like a few miles from Warsaw, the so-called wonder on Vistula. And think about all these aggressions against, like, Finland, or the Russian attempts to occupy Bessarabia and the occupation of Bessarabia in 1940, or the Russian-Hitler Pact, like the Stalin-Hitler Pact, when the Muscovy occupied part of Poland and was ready, like, to divide the world with Adolf Hitler together. So that was one case. And another case was Soviet Union in 1960s and 70s, when they truly, after some attempts like Berlin crisis, etc., they truly started to believe that there is nothing for them to seek in Europe, because it's like too well defended. And that is exactly why we need more investment in weapons and in our security sector and defense sector, because when you're good defended, the Russians don't dare to attack you. But the Russians tried to, like, establish some new influences in other countries like Vietnam, Korea, I don't know, like later Afghanistan, etc. But they never dared to do something like that in Europe. And that's why they needed to sign some deals with us to have their controlled territories and their occupation zones, and the states which they occupied, like Czechoslovakia back then, Polish People's Republic back then, and other like marionette states. They wanted to have them guaranteed, but they never dared, like, to launch a full-scale attack on NATO in Europe. And nowadays, Russia is quite another state. It's a state which is, on one hand, is weaker than the Soviet Union, like demographically, of course, territorially also. I would not dare to compare economy of Russia and Soviet Union, two different systems and two different times. But of course, the Soviet Union with 270 million of people and a lot of vassal states with their armies, and Russia with 145 million people, which are quite older, by the way, is a quite different state. But this Russia is much more aggressive than Soviet Union back then. That's why this Russia attacks neighbors. This Russia challenges the NATO. This Russia openly speaks about nuclear war. And by the way, the Soviet Union in internal propaganda never praised nuclear war. Of course, they were ready for a war, and of course, they militarized their population. But the official rhetoric was also just, we are for peace and nuclear war is so terrible. And now Russia openly pushed the narrative of nuclear war as something good and effective. And they really try to convince their own population that they can win nuclear war, and they should win nuclear war, and that the nuclear war is the shortest way to victory. That's what makes Russia very different. Okay. Andrei continues to comment, like, infantile believes in the magical diplomatic table. Yes, but your interpretation worked too. Okay, it is like one of ways of seeing the situation. And yes, I believe that Russia is very dangerous, exactly because they know how to use our weaknesses, and they will, if they defeat our military alliances, not on the battlefield, like 1,000 HIMARS and 300 F-16 will destroy Russian armor once and forever, but on the field of weakening our political decision makers, and weakening our will to defend ourselves. And then they will just take one country after another, and every time we will try to lullaby us into some comfortable sleep of, we can deal with Russia and they're not that stupid to provoke the world war. So I see that some advertising will start soon, and I don't know if everyone will see it. I have no idea how it works, frankly speaking. But if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Otherwise, I think that we can slowly start to wrap up our conversation. It is already 9:30 in Kyiv, and for me, this conversation was really very interesting and challenging also, because like, it's not always I talk for 90 minutes non-stop. Yeah, here is another question from Iron Bunny 80. When you think about the population of Soviet Union, 286 million people, and now Russia, 143 million, and the EU, 448 million, it amazes me how the West haven't done more for Ukraine. What are we doing? I totally agree. I totally agree. Like, look, we really have no idea about how cheap we can achieve victory for peace now. Like, real bargain. If you think about the last wars the mankind had, the global wars, World War II, World War One, Napoleonic Wars, or 30 Years Wars, it was totally devastating with all the efforts of the population. And like, if I'm not mistaken, Bulgaria has mobilized in World War One 20% of its population. In Germany, like every city was destroyed. Like old, like you're really like in Germany now, when you want to make some of your friend visit one city or another as a tourist, the first thing you say to that friend, like from the US or UK or I don't know, like Australia, see, like, this town was not that much destroyed during the World War II, or this town wasn't bombed during the World War II, because it is the first thing which makes an uh, old town of any city in Germany special. If this town was not destroyed during World War II, then it's really special. And that is what you say about like Heidelberg, or what you say, for example, about I don't know, like Görlitz, etc. Yeah, they have really authentic historical architecture. And now we don't have any more. We have seen that Russian army can be stopped by very easy means, like 20 HIMARS, like some dozens of Panzerhaubitze 2000, etc. And after all, we have all these equipment. We have it, especially the US. Like, what I personally cannot understand with Joe Biden, the United States have produced hundreds, if not thousands, of heavy equipment exactly for this one reason. If Soviet Union, if Moscow attacks Europe, and there will be a large-scale war in Europe, all these Abrams tanks, all these Bradleys, all this equipment goes to Europe, being shipped like with the navy vessels, and the European armies had to halt for 2 weeks to hold the Russians, not letting them cross in Rhine or reaching Rhine, and then the U.S. armies come and they start to fight the Russians back. That was the only reason why all this equipment was stored in the U.S. Now we know that there will be no war in the world where we will need to use that much of equipment from 1970s or 80s. If you see, the HIMARS was designed when, like, in 1980s, the Abrams tanks even earlier. Like, what for do you store them? If there is some very special sensitive equipment you don't want to give into hands of Ukrainians because you're not sure what will happen to them, you had 15 months, 18 months to dismantle it, to replace it. Like, I read very, like, really crazy arguments why Ukrainian pilots couldn't store being trained on F-16. One of the arguments was they were not that good in English. Like, what? First, I know Ukrainian pilots. They are very good in English. Second, if English is the only way how to operate F-16, then believe me, then there would have not been that much F-16 being sold worldwide. Because if English is the only way to operate F-16, then most of the armies of the world would never be able to operate it. So these are all just the excuses. And effectively, like, if you see what is going on in Germany and in France, when we said we need to produce that much artillery shells, 155 millimeter, because we need it. And we still say, okay, like, maybe not this year. We don't have money for that. We have promised Bundeswehr will be funded by 100 billion. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe they get that money, maybe they won't. What comes next year, we don't know. We still live in the dream that there will be no war because war is bad, and everyone thinks that war is bad. That means that there will be no war. But there are people like Vladimir Putin, or there are people like about 50 million of Russians who think that it's good that you have war. And like, even Alexei Navalny's foundation, which tries, like, to whitewash the Russian population as much they can and try to blame on Vladimir Putin what is happening, they published today as statistics when they say, oh, we have proven it. Not 78% of Russians support Vladimir Putin, only 48% support. Wow, Russians are so good, only 48%. Have you heard yourself? Russia is 148 million people. You say 48% of these people support Vladimir Putin. It is 70 million people. It is almost twice as we have Ukrainians in Ukraine. Like, are you crazy? What are you talking about? And in Germany, France, and other countries, we still believe these can be gone somewhere, and we cannot invest in all, like, our security and defense sector because we have other needs. And here, I wanted to address this story, and then I started to answer the question by Andrei Novak, which was important. But now I come back to that idea. The German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP, has published recently a very interesting report, and I would say a revolutionary report, saying NATO has 5 to 10 years until there will be a full-scale conflict with Russia. And we are not capable to stop it or postpone it, because it's not about we provoke Russia or that we can make it faster or make it closer or something. No, it's because Russia wants it. Because Russia, as I said before, Russia has now 42% or 45% of their budget spending in army and other militarized sectors, and over 30% purely into army. 30%. There has not been such high spending on military since Soviet era. You don't have these spendings if you want to have like some parity or peace. You can invest this spending only if you want it to be repaid by a major military victory. That's it. There is no way, because no economy can survive 30% of budget spending on military. No economy. They cut everything. They cut education. They cut healthcare. They cut social care. They cut everything just to feed the military sector, just to produce drones, to produce cruise missiles, etc. And now think, what would happen if they start launching their cruise missiles against Berlin? Like, we cannot cover our air. Like, we don't have that much air defense. Russian missiles could go through Polish airspace this year and land in Bigotch, like in the center of Poland, which Poland say that's geographical center of Poland. And that is what Russians can do. And it is not about that then we can retaliate and strike, etc. No, because the moment when the Russian missiles hit Berlin, the majority of Germans will go to streets and say capitulate, because okay, we just don't know. We don't want to fight. We don't want to fight the Russians again. And we have this culture of lieber rot als tot, better red than dead. And I'm really very proud of my German compatriots who say now we need to support Ukraine. We know that 75% of Germans say we need to support Ukraine. Germans are much more clever than Olaf Scholz. And 54%, according to the latest survey by Körber Stiftung, Körber Foundation, said that Ukrainians must fight until the liberation of all sovereign territory, which is once again much better than Olaf Scholz. But I also don't believe that the German trauma of fighting war on own territory will let the German population to really fight when the war hits not Ukraine but Germany. And we know that according to other polls, only 14% of Germans say that they are ready to fight with arms in their hands for their own nation when their country is being attacked by a foreign power. And Vladimir Putin knows that. And that's why they stockpile their military production. That's why they invest everything. They sell the future of their kids. They sell everything into this war machine, because they know, and independently on what goes on in Ukraine, they have that hope that the war in Ukraine can be frozen by the support of Scholz, by the support of Biden. And there will be some equilibrium, and the Russians will try to influence us through the like diplomatic platforms, etc. And then in 5 years, they rebuild their army, they train new personnel, they develop new military concepts, they produce new missiles, and then they hit. Then they just try to grab a part of Estonia, they try to grab a part of Latvia, of Lithuania, maybe of Poland. And then we'll wait for the reaction of NATO. And then they maybe like send 10 missiles against Berlin and say, look, if you don't like, if you stay away from Estonia, then we will not send another 100. And then German chancellor will capitulate, because we don't want our German cities to be destroyed for the next time within 19 years. And that is, I'm afraid, what Russia's plan is. They are not interested in any compromise. They want to go as far as they can, and they always go as far as we allow them to go. Iron Barney says, yes, we have it, and two, we have a capability to refill everything. For some reason, that we still seem to be missing. Yeah, because like the budget spending, because like they don't want to spend. Like, if you think about the German way of spending money, in Bundeswehr, in German war ministry, we have like we mostly spend money on bureaucratic procedures. Like, we don't spend money that much on equipment, but we spend them on salaries, mostly of salaries of bureaucrats, because like every report must be must be written, must be checked, must be sent for approval, sent back for being rewritten, etc., etc. Yeah, they Russians are clearly showing what they are wanting to do in the now and future. Yes, unfortunately, and unfortunately, it's been ignored also by Olaf Scholz. I don't know why, but it is what we see. Well, we have really cool 1 hour 50 minutes of this discussion. I think we have discussed more or less everything. And once again, it's not every day I speak for almost 120 minutes, like 110 minutes in a row without any stop. And it was a huge pleasure for me to communicate. I really advise you to really recommend you to read this report to the GAP written by Dr. Christian Mölling and his colleague, and read it. It's really a very eye opener, because for the first time, as far as I remember, a German think tank so openly say about the perspective of military conflict, if not war, with Russia, and clearly say that it's not in our power to change the mind of Russia. It's only in our power to prepare for the strike. It actually reminds me on the German way of teaching people how to ride a car. If you pass a driving test in Germany, and German driving style is very special, because Germany is the only country, I think, in the world where you have a pretty much distance of the highways. Like, I think 1/3 of all German highways have no speed limit. So theoretically, you may ride like 200 kilometers per hour, 300 kilometers per hour, as much as you want. Like, I personally had once an experience of riding on a normal highway, absolutely legally, with a car 260 kilometers per hour, and it is about like how many? It's like 150 miles per hour, 160 miles per hour, maybe 170. And that's why the German driving test is very special. Like, you have a lot of situations you go through. You need to read like that thick book with like hundreds of questions, with all the questions. What you do when you see a child like standing in the street with a ball, then you need to think, okay, maybe he will lose his ball, he will run for his ball, like football, and that's why you need to slow down, etc. So one of the test questions, which is being repeated regularly, is what to do when you go through when you ride in your car on a street through a forest, and you see an animal, a wild animal like a deer or a wild boar, and it's too late to you see that the impact will be immediate, like you cannot change it. What do you do? And the wrong question is try to go to the side, or like try to push the brakes, etc. only, because the you need to understand clearly as a driver that you cannot avoid the impact. You cannot avoid it. So you need to minimize the negative impact. And the negative impact can be you hit the animal, you got pushed to another like lane, you hit another car, people die, you increase the damage. Or people who sit in your car will die because your car will like roll over. So the correct answer is you hold your steering wheel very, very firmly. You push the brakes as much as you can to reduce the speed as much as you can, and you prepare for the impact. So you know that the impact will happen, but you need to reduce the negative consequence. You firmly hold the steering wheel, you push the brake, and you prepare for the impact. So your car goes directly, and only this animal gets killed, and you hope that nobody in your car will get injured, at least seriously, and nobody will be killed. And that is what I miss in our German politicians now with their Russian policy. We know that the impact is inevitable. Vladimir Putin has proven us that he wants a war, that he doesn't see any compromise, and he uses any what we believe is compromise just to stay stronger for the next iteration and then start a war. And we are too afraid to say us the impact is inevitable. You will have that crash. The question is how much negative consequence you will bring to those who are sitting in your car and to other cars with your stupidity and with your way to deny the reality. I think very much that our politicians will wake up one day, although I don't believe that it will happen soon and in the right time. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention and for your questions. Thank you for everyone who was in this room: Alex Oksharov, Oren Biny, AT, Andrei Novak, Natalie, Isabel Fogel, Jonathan, Kale 2011 DE. Thank you so much, Yulia Romanets, of course, and thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for your interest. Have a great day. Slava Ukraini.